Hello.
Our story begins with the new Supreme Leader of the First Order. Snoke was dead, the Resistance gone, and the Battle of Crate becoming a tale of the First Order defeat. Kylo Ren may have tried to crush the Resistance to bring a new order to the galaxy, but that was a failure. They escaped. His attempts to kill the past had fallen short. His attempt to turn Rey to the dark side was another shortcoming. Everything he wanted was no more. All of his work into becoming the new Vader was for nothing. Ben was seduced to the dark side by Snoke, yet his longing for identity was found with Rey. There was one burden to Ben Solo that lay beneath the figurative mask of Kylo Ren, the legacy of his birthright. He was both the expectation of Luke Skywalker and of Anakin Skywalker. His mother was unlike either. She didn't choose darkness. She triumphed above it all, built a new path for her family. But Ben could never let go of who he was, the legacy of his name. He realized, especially in the absence of Rey following Crate, that regardless of who it was, Luke or Snoke, he was just a set of expectations. He never was that to her. Of course, Master Skywalker never saw his nephew as that. He simply understood that he could become it if Luke wasn't careful. And that ironically left Ben where he was now. Not more than 2 full weeks after the Hosnian Cataclysm, the Force had awoken in his opposite in the Force. As Snoke said, darkness rises, and light to meet it. That is the very will of the Force itself. In those 2 weeks, all of his seduction brought him to a painful realization. Killing Han Solo changed absolutely nothing for him. For years, he made his father the villain he never was, and what did that get him on the Starkiller? A bowcaster wound to the stomach? An unbalanced mind that left him to be defeated in combat? He gained nothing but weakness from one thing that should have given him strength. His uncle was now gone. Rey had abandoned him by choosing the Jedi path, and Kylo had his First Order. He was the Supreme Leader now. All of his pull back towards the light because of Rey, because she saw him for who he really was, had to be covered up again. Like the wounds across his body and the destruction of his knight helmet, it all needed to be covered. But even Kylo Ren knew that as much as he tried to hide his weaknesses, he was never going to match up to his legacy. Vader could be saved, even when it was invisible. Kylo believed that even if he couldn't hide it, no one could save him. Rey offered him a choice, a chance to change everything, to destroy the First Order, forget Snoke and forge a new order, the one that Luke left behind that currently rippled across the galaxy. It was the epitome of Kylo's failure, actually. He thought he destroyed both his instructors. Snoke was absolutely dead, but he couldn't even touch Luke. And now, after his powerful army with thousands of turbo lasers fired on his old master, it did not kill Luke Skywalker. It turned the age-old Jedi Master into a greater legend than he would have been otherwise. Every hour, Kylo watched a new retelling of Luke's heroic final stand on Crate etch itself across the galaxy. On a previous assault, he saw a graffiti figure of Skywalker standing up against the First Order. It sent Kylo into a flash of rage. He could not destroy Luke, no matter how hard he tried, and Luke was right. When he struck his father down in anger, his father never left him. It was now the same for Luke. Kylo was a failure. He needed someone to help him find his path again. As leader of the First Order, he had to be practical with his own orders. General Hux had already murdered his own father to ascend. Surely he had considered betraying Kylo too. Now, the target was much larger. The same type of bickering that caused an internal civil war with imperial warlords 20 years before could bring the First Order to its knees. Kylo needed to establish himself, to find someone to help him, someone with the power to make sure the Jedi did not return, someone who could guide his First Order into becoming a proper empire. While the pathway to Sidious wouldn't reveal itself for the longer part of a year, Kylo Ren went to Snoke's labs to begin his research. Hux was ordered to remain focused on the war effort with the Resistance, which for the First Order meant pancaking planets around the unknown regions and the Outer Rim. With the capital of the New Republic destroyed, people were afraid. There was strength in unity, but even the government established by Mon Mothma had unity issues. Too many imperial-era senators with their grips on the recovery democracy led to this free-for-all. The First Order was simply capitalizing. It's how they earned favorability from systems they invaded. It was much easier to surrender and pledge allegiance to avoid catastrophe, rather than actually endure an attack from the First Order. Since his lapdogs were preoccupied with expansion, Kylo delved deep into Snoke's method of Force communication. He believed that what his old teacher used to connect himself with Rey could be used to find another. Surely there were other beings in the galaxy that had a natural strength, a raw affinity for the Force like Rey and himself. He still didn't want her dead, but he needed to find a replacement in the case that she wouldn't join him. Going through Snoke's old notes led to a series of very confusing conclusions. Being that Snoke was practically a clone of Palpatine, manipulated by the undead Sith Lord from Exegol, he knew information once possessed by Darth Sidious. This was used by the former Emperor to try and reconstruct his broken body. Now that Snoke was actually gone, the information remained behind for Kylo to use. It was already well known to Ben that Snoke was a student of the Force as a whole. He didn't bother himself with specifically using light or dark. He wanted knowledge. It's why Snoke didn't consider himself a Sith. Within weeks, that very information found Ben Solo's hands. He delved deep into it, discovering aspects of the Force he didn't believe to be possible. It led him to something Palpatine was trying to develop, an alternative world between worlds, the Dark World if you will. It was designed to mimic the vast power of the ancient path, but permit him to protect himself from threats like Vader. Kylo found these old specs and took the information to the hollowed-out, destroyed temple on the old Sith world of Malachor. It was a hub of darkness, and Ben simply went there to harness it, to find an aid, a champion to serve under him and be loyal exclusively to him. Ironically, in his detachment from the Sith, he was simply accidentally recreating the Banite lineage, a rule of two for himself. Days would pass by where Supreme Leader Ben Solo would struggle, suffer even, trying to break into this dark world between worlds. He tried to possess the darkness with all of his might, and it did nothing. No matter what Snoke taught him, Luke remained right. The darkness was not more powerful, simply more seductive, easier to manipulate. In his frustration, Ben let go of his hatred, to the best of his abilities, and cloaked himself in the light. Slowly and quietly, a domain of darkness embraced him, and he slipped into what Palpatine tried to create, the dark world between worlds. Palpatine could never enter it, because he never had the capability to cover himself in the light. A splinter iteration of the world between worlds opened up, a portal that only displayed pain, just as the dark side did. Ben opened his eyes and looked at a long line of suffering. Similar to what Rey experienced in the cave of Ahch-To, it never ended, just a singular tunnel with portals on either side that seemingly never ended. And at the front of it all was himself. He was emotionally crushed on Crate, having held his father's dice, watched his equal half abandon him, and been defeated by his uncle. Then he saw the fight on Starkiller. It continued down the line, with a series of other, very powerful Darksiders suffering. Vader being electrocuted by the Emperor, or Palpatine's painful resurrection on Exegol. But the cycle continued. It had to lead to someone important, someone that would actually help him. Ben rushed down the corridor of portals and eventually stopped when he saw a burst of light. It shocked him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was Mustafar, the location of his grandfather's castle, but there was no castle. There were only raging volcanoes and a man yelling. Down below on a lava bank, he could see what seemed to be his grandfather. Despite Ben's parents keeping the identity of his grandfather a secret, Kylo knew what Anakin and what Vader looked like. His obsession with legacy was unending, and here before him sat Skywalker, defeated, weak, powerless, just as Ben felt right now. This man, without limbs, became the most feared enforcer the galaxy had ever seen. He was exactly what Kylo needed right now, and without hesitation, without even thinking about what the ramifications might be, just as fire ignited up Anakin's back, Ben pulled the Chosen One from Mustafar. To Obi-Wan, it looked as if Anakin slipped all the way into the lava and died. He had no reason to assume that something different happened. Why would he? Anakin, though, watched a man with a very similar build and look to himself brush fire off his back and pick him up. Words weren't exchanged, just confusion, anger, and from Ben, dedication. Kylo was going to change his life around, and the truth is, he didn't really lie. When they exited the Dark World, Malachor wasn't just a Sith temple anymore. It was a massive facility. Kylo checked his surroundings, but he didn't see anything indicating that it was a different planet or even a different system. The facility was large and it surrounded the base of the ancient relic. Above them, hovering in the sky, were massive star destroyers. Kylo rushed himself and his grandfather to the side of the structure and looked around in confusion. Anakin was still reeling in agony as he tried to do anything to get out of the situation. It's not like he didn't try and kill Ben for carrying him around, but Ben put a stop to it the second they exited the Dark World. He had to try and find a way back into the portal, but it was completely gone. Again, without hesitating, he broke into the facility with Skywalker and found a medical lab that could help him put his grandfather back together. As the procedure started, he attempted to make contact with any number of his First Order allies, but the communicator didn't even work. It worried him, until his focus snapped back to Anakin, who demanded, despite his bursts of pain, to know what was happening. He had no clues, no answers, and very quickly, Kylo Ren would tell Anakin that they were related. He was Skywalker's grandson, and he had saved him from Mustafar, because he needed someone to truly teach him the dark side, someone that could be loyal to him and serve with him, someone that could display loyalty and share in the spoils of victory. What immediately followed was everything Kylo knew about Anakin, which admittedly wasn't a lot, but it covered the destruction of the Jedi twice, the rise of the Empire, the death of his grandmother, and some other important details regarding Vader and his tenure as the Emperor's enforcer. Yet there was an immediate disconnect. Skywalker, in this form, had absolutely no incentive to join the dark side. If what men told him was true, everything and everyone he loved was dead, and it was entirely his own doing. Did this mean that Anakin's initial reaction was to apologize and try and change himself? Absolutely not. He waited until the appropriate up-to-date metallic limbs were attached to his body, and he forced himself off the medical table. Anakin did not need a respirator because his lungs weren't burnt. The fire only reached the stubs of his legs and his lower back. Once he felt some semblance of balance, he shoved his metallic arm into Ben's chest and launched him into the wall and held him there. Kylo squirmed under the grips of the metallic hand, and Anakin demanded to be free from this hellhole. But the truth is, not even Ben knew where he was. He shoved back, but the metallic limbs were stronger than even Ben's arms. He felt bruises form around the marks on his skin, and Anakin threatened to kill him. If everyone he loved died, and he became an agent of evil, then he would rather die here. There's not a single person alive that Anakin could exact his revenge against, so Ben would have to cut it. His second metallic hand reached for Kylo's throat and he pressed down. The fallen Jedi squirmed under the oppressive metal grip of his grandfather. He cut down with both of his arms, trying to break Skywalker, but the limbs were unbreakable by flesh. Then, as everything started to go dark, blaster fire erupted through the medical bay windows, clipping Anakin and forcing him to drop. Stormtroopers fired into the room, and Kylo, expecting First Order era models, saw Imperial variants. His crossguard flashed to life and he swung it across his body, deflecting the shots back into the few men and killing them. He turned back to his grandfather as alarms began to ring. He quickly told Anakin that something was different. These were not stormtroopers in the First Order. So there were two options for Skywalker. He could stay here and continue to try and seek revenge against his own grandson, or they could escape and get to the bottom of everything that was going on. Anakin pressed himself off the ground and decided to stick with the former, allowing Ben to use his fiery weapon in defense of the two of them through the corridors of the massive complex. Anakin eventually grabbed a blaster and used it to kill chasing stormtroopers as they eventually landed in the hangar bay. They would board a shuttle and escape from the complex, using the ship to jump to random coordinates after being chased by a trio of TIE fighters. Of course, once the hyperspace lanes appeared, tension between grandfather and grandson returned. Anakin still had his vendetta against Ben for saving him and making him live through a life without anyone he loved. Kylo, though, completely forgot about their little bickering contest inside the medical bay. To Ben, his entire galaxy had just been erased, and he didn't know why. Imperial stormtroopers weren't even a thing anymore. By the time he joined Snoke in the First Order, they all had new armor. The military gear of the fallen Empire disappeared, and judging by the date inside the shuttle's computer, it was the exact same day he left. Only a few minutes had passed, and they passed because he was busy escaping Malachor with his grandfather. He tried to get into the console to look into the current day politics of the galaxy. The Hosnian Cataclysm was only a short few months ago, and it should still be the main story on the HoloNet, but everything was different. The simple means of accessing communication or information needed verification. Luckily, they were able to use the Imperial pilot's information to get into the HoloNet, but that was just the beginning of the problems for the two distant relatives. While Kylo was digging deep into information on their new era, Anakin was pacing back and forth behind him, deciding if he wanted to kill Kylo or if the same motive should simply be self-inflicted. He only waited because maybe an answer could be provided, one that could change everything around for them. Their problems though only multiplied. As it turns out, there was no New Republic. There wasn't even a Rebel Alliance. No one knew who Luke Skywalker was because he was dead. The story went as such, and it did clear Kylo Ren's name from being a villain to Anakin, because from Anakin's perspective, Kylo wouldn't look too vindicated for killing his own son and trying to kill his daughter. So it went like this. The Empire rose without Vader. He died on Mustafar, and Sidious moved on. He went through a continuous cycle of students and acolytes. The Inquisitors were used to destroy the Jedi, with aid from the Emperor himself. He cycled in extremely loyal Force users to not only assist him with the Jedi Plague, but also provide blood samples for his experiments. The rebellion grew naturally, of course, but slowly it fell apart. Without Luke arriving to stop the Death Star, the Alliance was destroyed at Yavin. For Palpatine, it became the change of time in the galaxy, the ABYIE, after Battle of Yavin. Luke did join Ben Kenobi as a Jedi in their triumphant return to the galaxy, but by that point it was too late. Sidious employed Mara Jade as an acolyte of his own, using her to seduce Luke to the dark side, where they would kill the Jedi and die by Palpatine's hand when they inevitably attempted to overpower him. This coming year would mark the 35-year anniversary of universal peace in the galaxy under Emperor Palpatine's rule. He hadn't mastered the ability to essence transfer yet, but to the galaxy he was their true leader. Several generations grew up under his rule, and only knew an era where Palpatine was the only force of law in the galaxy. Nothing challenged him. His empire expanded further than the Republic, its military remained unopposed, and not a soul thought about abandoning Palpatine's regime. It's why there was a full-blown outpost on Malachor. The Emperor wanted to master every aspect of the Force that he could. Even though he looked more decrepit after living for another 30 years, he was unstoppable. He didn't hide on Coruscant anymore. He simply moved about, staying in the shadows. Palpatine destroyed the Jedi, eradicated the rule of two, and wiped out any other minor Force sect in the galaxy. The Barrando sages on Doran slaughtered, the acolytes of the Beyond and the Knights of Ren murdered. He was the only power in the galaxy, just as he preferred, and Kylo Ren created this. Despite his attempts to build himself an empire, he created the ultimate reality for Palpatine. He failed by not trusting himself and by relying on a legacy that no longer existed. Anakin, still trying to process everything, had to come to the understanding that nothing Kylo Ren did in his timeline remotely mattered here. Even if Ben stood against Anakin's own son and daughter, it fundamentally didn't matter. Palpatine destroyed everything he loved. His wife, his friends, and his children were dead. Instead of seeing a resolution to this through the now destroyed Jedi path, Skywalker resorted to the anger he felt on Mustafar. His missing limbs were a constant, immediate reminder to him that he had failed too. If Sidious could use the dark side to own as much of the galaxy as he did, then surely Skywalker could harness that same power to destroy Palpatine. Kylo Ren watched the HoloNet reports over and over again, as historical events from his timeline vanished before his very eyes. The day the New Republic was established was actually the enactment of the HoloNet Supervision Bill, which allowed the Empire to track everything any user did on the HoloNet. The defeat of the Empire at Jakku was actually an Imperial expansion moment, as they dove directly into the unknown regions and conquered an entirely new quadrant of the galaxy using one of 2 Death Stars. Simple moments that had massive implications in his time were now just pro-Palpatine victories. He was everything he believed he could be, and for someone like Ben Solo, whose most imposing Force users were his mother, Luke, and Snoke, it was terrifying. Anakin's own feelings were quite similar. He dealt with the Clone Wars and the darkness that came with them, but the threat of Sidious, Tyrannus, and even Yoda was always present. He knew powerful Force users, and he should have been one of them had he not failed. So he presented Kylo Ren with an offer to become his apprentice, if you will. Palpatine had taken something from both of them. He was their one common enemy. Anakin, feeling the same frustration he felt on Mustafar prior to his duel with Kenobi, told Ben that together they could bring a new order to the galaxy. It became abundantly clear to Skywalker that regardless of Ren saving him, he was always destined for a life of suffering. The only difference now is that he didn't have to become Darth Vader and suffer with a respirator. All he needed post Mustafar were the metallic limbs he had now, and they were much easier to adjust to. Anakin knew that even if he wanted to take on Palpatine alone, he needed an ally. Plus, at this current point, he had no problem sacrificing his grandson to Sidious so that he could prevail in the end. Though something that came along with this offer was Anakin's hope to make an even greater change. They wouldn't kill Palpatine to make a difference for the galaxy. They would do it so that his empire could be ruled by equal parts. If Ben Solo wanted an empire, or like he said apparently to Rey, to forge a new order, then they could simply commandeer one for themselves. It was an offer that Kylo Ren immediately accepted. He could finally bond with the truest form of Darth Vader, the one that never should have lost to Obi-Wan on Mustafar. As the 2 Darksiders came to realize, the Empire was far too expanded for them to actually establish a base of operations. They really couldn't try and learn from the Sith, nor the Jedi, even though that option disgusted both of them. Sidious, with his 50+ years of rule over the galaxy, found every single Jedi hideout. All of their information had been confiscated, burned, destroyed, or hidden away for future research. Every single religion of the Force had also been removed and covered up. Though one thing became apparent to Anakin, something that his grandson probably wouldn't know about. There was one religion that met its own disastrous end before the end of the Clone Wars, the Night Sisters of Dathomir. Not to say that Palpatine would forget about them, but they might have slipped his mind because of the other focuses he had during the formation of the Galactic Empire. When they arrived at Dathomir, they located a small Imperial outpost, but nothing in comparison to the fortified facility at Malachor. It was small enough and understaffed enough for the 2 of them to land inside the mountains and make their trek to the forbidden caves of the long-gone Dathomiri Night Sisters. Skywalker and Solo entered and began their investigations. Sidious's troopers might have removed any spellbooks they saw, but they didn't discover all the secrets of Mother Talzin and Old Daka. It provided room for grandson and grandfather to scope out the cave and discover any important details that might aid them in their training regiment. Even though Ben was nearly a full decade older than his grandfather, it was Anakin who had the more refined training. It came with being from the era he was from. Skywalker had the benefit of being raised during a time where the Jedi were 10,000 strong and capable of waging a galactic-scale war. Ben grew up in an era where the Jedi were rebuilding, and Luke, who had some pretty spotty teachers, had to create a regiment from scratch. It was a generally unfair thing to compare the 2 of them. The differences were more evident on Malachor, as Skywalker noted Kylo having weird motions inside his usage of Form 4. It was definitely the right form, just not the style he'd ever seen it used before. Regardless, their searching led them to Mother Talzin's secret cove, one that Old Daka used during Grievous's assault half a century ago. It led to a series of tunnels that directed the 2 curious minds to a chamber with almost infinite knowledge. Anakin chose Dathomir because of their close affinity for the dark side. The Night Sisters famously relied on darkness for their magic, so if they wanted to expand their knowledge on the Force, it would best be accomplished here, inside these caves. Sidious wouldn't leave his Sith information out for anyone, not that it would matter anyways. He completely destroyed the concept of the Force for most people. No one knew about it, and the remaining generations that watched the Clone Wars never spoke about it, because just speaking about the Force or the Jedi could lead to death without trial. Palpatine blacklisted any thought of the Jedi, and people simply forced themselves to forget, to protect themselves and their families. Sidious wouldn't ever consider any normal Force user a threat, but without any knowledge of the Force existing amongst the masses, there literally wasn't a way for a threat to be bred. The individual needed to be trained by him specifically, because every other Force user was dead that he knew of. Ben and Anakin continued to develop a strong relationship with one another. The sense of belonging Kylo found with Rey was developed here with Anakin, just to make sure everyone knows, obviously without the romance part. There was a strong bond, forged through not only mutual agreement but training together constantly. Their similar mindset regarding the Sith and the Jedi, though, brought them closer than anything else could have. Anakin, before losing the Kenobi, was right at the edge of it. He clearly thought lesser of Palpatine and lesser of the Jedi because he wanted to save Padme, but he didn't come completely to the rationale of destroying both. Kylo Ren, with all of that now dead legacy, wanted to completely erase the past, destroy the Sith, the Jedi, the Rebels, the First Order, and all of it, so that they could build something new, something the galaxy hadn't ever seen before. Grandfather and grandson, now, knew that they had no chance to overthrow Palpatine's regime, but if they became his replacement, if they somehow managed to inform the public that their emperor had groomed them from birth to succeed him, then perhaps they could take over the Galactic Empire. They could maintain the same rules, same influence, maybe change a few things, but be everything Palpatine was. It would be the greatest revenge because they wouldn't even change what Palpatine built. It would just mean that his 100+ years of life dedicated to creating and building his regime from the ground up meant nothing. He'd be left to wither away, having lost it all, as those who replaced him changed nothing, besides destroying every last remnant of the Sith, finalizing their own philosophy with all the Empire's vast power. Thanks to Palpatine not knowing about either of them returning, Anakin and Kylo had plenty of time to just train together. They recognized that Sidious would be a threat unlike any other. This was the Dark Lord of the Sith. They needed to approach with caution and prowess in their skills. So for 5+ years straight, they trained without stopping. They developed their strategy, studied the ways of Force and magic, and gained a true understanding of the Empire and how they could gaslight it into viewing them as Palpatine's successors. When the time came for them to actually leave Dathomir, they disappeared without a soul knowing they were there to begin with. The code transponder for their shuttle was long overdue, especially since it was reported missing at Malachor. So when they decided to create themselves a new identity on an Imperial stronghold planet, they did the unthinkable. They called themselves Palpatine twins. Anakin and Ben were both of the Emperor's bloodline. They were just simply in need of transport, because they made a mistake on an expedition on behalf of their father. While this seemed like a nothing excuse to Anakin and Ben, it had tremendous effects once they left the Imperial stronghold world. This was like Ezra using Brom Titus or Lando Calrissian or the Emperor's nephew as a codename. The workers that learned of Palpatine's quote-unquote heirs reported it to everyone they knew, and a small rumor transformed into a media firestorm. Palpatine unintentionally created the perfect environment for something like this to thrive. It's genuinely a surprise no one tried it before, but people were simply too afraid to accidentally cross the Emperor's path. So because the entire media ran by the Empire was hyper-focused on pro-Palpatine news, this bombshell came across as the perfect pro-Palpatine report. Every outlet on the HoloNet saw this as an opportunity to display their loyalty for the Emperor and his children, positive think pieces, curiosity about their personalities, how old they might be, if they had spouses, where they might be going next, what the Emperor thought of them, all swirled around in the heads of Imperial citizens. Sidious wasn't very pleased with these imposters, so he simply informed his royal guards to hunt them down and kill them. If they couldn't do that, then bring these imposters before his throne, and he would do it himself. Despite their hunt for Palpatine going quite poorly, Kylo Ren and Anakin noticed how their little lie transformed into the perfect sideshow. They could use it, if done correctly, to benefit them. People wanted to know more about them, and the Emperor's protocol to silence these seemingly regular galactic citizens ended up becoming a warm-up. The Praetorians discovered the two Darksiders at a port on Coruscant. Red Guards rushed after Skywalker and Solo. They led Palpatine's secret unit through the streets in a chase, keeping their true identity as threats a secret. Neither of them wanted Palpatine to know that there were active Force users in the galaxy, and they certainly couldn't be seen by the population fighting against Palpatine's guards if they were Palpatines. It was simply better to run and confront the guards alone. When they found the location to stage their attack, they ignited two crimson lightsabers and fended off the approaching Royal Guard. This was in all reality the perfect warm-up for the two of them. Their sabers connected with royal staves, allowing Skywalker and Solo to stand back to back. The weapons spun into their own respective forms. Skywalker aggressively used his speedier and more powerful strikes to both disarm his opponents or throw them away. Kylo, despite learning many of these same skills from his grandfather, used a more methodical approach. His cross-guard intercepted strikes, and he overpowered the guards too, with a sloppier but precise series of strikes. The Praetorians, despite outnumbering the two Darksiders 20-2, were unable to stop them. Kylo and Anakin each respectively destroyed their fair share of guards, disarming, mutilating, executing, and crushing any which one of them. Yet this little warm-up came with its own benefits. Because Sidious wanted these two quote-unquote heirs to his throne to be dealt with privately, these Praetorians came straight from his palace. It provided Anakin and Ben with the coordinates to a location that no one else in the galaxy aside from a few Imperial moffs had. By using the Praetorian ship logs, they were able to take the royal shuttle from Coruscant to Palpatine's hidden location on Tython. Because he had conquered all light in the galaxy, the Emperor chose a location that not even his greatest enemies would think to look for. It wasn't only the location of an ancient Jedi temple, but the only pathway to restarting the Jedi Order. The island at Ahsoka had been obliterated due to Palpatine's desire to erase the past of the Jedi. While there were no more Jedi, if anyone ever tried to restore the Order, they would suffer by his own hand by going to Tython. He knew that there were guardians of the Jedi secrets in the galaxy, and until he outlived all of them, remaining here with the last little history of the Jedi would save him if they ever tried to return. As anticipated, the Praetorian ship returned to an illustrious imperial palace. It was far larger than the Sith temples on Korriban, Exegol, or Malachor. It towered over the palace on Coruscant, and it was a work of imperial art. It contained everything Sidious needed to stroke his ego. He didn't look for the guard when their ship landed. He waited for the captain to address him inside his own throne room. The Emperor watched the massive doors open before him, and instead of seeing a flashy crimson outfit, he saw two individuals coated in black uniforms. They looked almost like brothers, and he mocked them. If they thought that destroying his Praetorian unit was easy, then surely they'd enjoy destroying him. Without noticing that one of the two of them was Skywalker, he believed that these were run-of-the-mill Force users that won a minor engagement against a royal guard. Palpatine rose from his seat and dropped his hands to his side. Like a predator, he tilted his head and watched the two Force users from across the room. It was at this moment when he noticed that Skywalker looked familiar, but it had been well over 70 years since the last time he saw Anakin. Just as he made the connection, their lightsabers bursted to life, surprising the Emperor. He never expected two wannabe Sith to eventually be his only threat in the galaxy. The Sith Lord always assumed that it would be some sort of broken Jedi trying to do it. In his surprise, he readied himself for battle to destroy his opponents. Ben and Anakin rushed forward, splitting off to the sides as they charged him. Palpatine turned his head, watching their movements respectively, when a blast of electricity crawled out of the ground in front of Ben. Having experienced Snoke, Ben was able to leap over it and protect himself with the Force, thanks to magic. Anakin, using this distraction, rushed in directly. Sidious turned and quickly released a storm of electricity. As he did, a black cloud rose above his head, and Skywalker shoved his saber in front of his face to block the dark power. Ben, with the opportunity, leapt into the cloud and lost track of his opponent. Inside the cloud, he could hear Palpatine's voice. It was calling to him to surrender his soul. He could have everything he wanted if he just surrendered now. Ben slashed around himself, striking for an invisible force. Palpatine just laughed as Skywalker continued to slip on the slick floor as he tried to get closer to the Emperor, whose electricity was blinding him. When the electricity stopped, a red lightsaber ignited from the cloud, and Ben, at the last second, protected himself with the hilt of the crossguard. The strike that would have removed an entire limb saw him raising the saber into the right position to defend himself. Solo pressed back, surprisingly overpowering the frail Sidious. Palpatine didn't expect a proper user of the dark side to present himself, and as he lost his grip, he rolled the saber in his hand, allowing him to spin away from Ben. Another flash of electricity coated the floor, forcing Ben and Anakin to drop to their knees. They couldn't see anything but the cloud. From the darkness, they saw alternative versions of themselves, as Palpatine forced them to beg for their own mercy. This was nothing but a mind game to deceive and break his opponents, because Sidious recognized that he didn't have to play with lightsabers at his old age. That was just foolish in his mind. Ben and Anakin both yelled out in agony as they tried to use the Force to break free, as Sidious slowly understood each of them, pulling from their memories, their weaknesses, their souls, to portray each of them with who they really were, alternative versions of themselves. Anakin saw Padme, Ahsoka, his children, and Obi-Wan. They were telling him to give up, to join them in the Force. There was no fight anymore. Ben saw his mother and father. They were both doing the same, calling to him to surrender his soul. Rey was there too, telling him to join her, so that they could bring peace to the Force. The two dark adepts felt their bodies reverberate in pain, and they pushed through. With sabers in hand, they cut through their loved ones, removing themselves from the infernal game. Sidious watched the red lightsabers move ever so closely to him, and they slashed up and down. He tried to defend himself, but as he pushed Skywalker's saber away with the Force, it collided with Ben's, and slapped back across Palpatine's elbow, removing the entire thing. The Sith Lord's concentration broke. He watched Ben bat his saber across his chest. Sidious stumbled backwards as the dark cloud evaporated around them, and Skywalker's crimson saber, after missing for 70 years, was plunged into Palpatine's chest. He died the second his heart was eviscerated by the beaming light. His body dropped to the ground and Anakin turned to Ben. He told the kid he wasn't bad. It was said in an endearing way, and they both extinguished their lightsabers and watched Palpatine's body to make sure it didn't return to harm them. Naturally, as they agreed on, they would become co-emperors, divide the Galactic Empire up into two different quadrants and rule together. Thanks to having access to a facility that only the most important and powerful Imperials knew about, there was no doubt in the Moffs' minds that Anakin and Ben were the actual heirs to Palpatine's throne. No one could get to that facility except people that knew Palpatine personally. They would be publicly coronated at the galactic capital, in front of billions of loyal subjects. Eventually the day would come where their names would officially change from Palpatine to Skywalker or Solo, but until that time, they'd have to establish their own firm rule over the galaxy to make sure people knew that they were still Palpatines. They were both young, handsome men. They provided a new connection to the youth of the galaxy. Everyone for the last near century lived under Palpatine's rule, not even including those who had 8 years of Chancellor Palpatine. Anakin and Ben were something new for the people to connect with. Ben in his late 30s, Anakin in his late 20s. Their role didn't necessarily change from what Palpatine did. As they agreed, they were simply taking control. It was the greatest revenge to someone like the Emperor, someone whose ego was as large as his. He built a galaxy for two people he would have hated. The dark side remained very a part of their lives, as they dedicated a great deal of time to making sure no one would ever challenge them again. But that was the thing. Palpatine already did the hard work for them. The only thing they had to destroy was the Sith. Of course, there would be Sheev Palpatine purists, individuals that only wanted to serve the former Emperor. But as Anakin and Ben told the galaxy, Sheev died in his sleep, a tale so similar to Plagueis's. The Sith Lord had everything and simply passed away, with a full and complete life having been lived. It provided the galaxy a chance to grieve, but also accept that it was truly time to trust the new Palpatines. While there really wouldn't be any major challenges for Skywalker and Solo, they continued to expand the Empire. Technology to visit other galaxies was developed. They added new star tech to the 2 Death Stars and a Starkiller base. This was the most powerful and functional iteration of the Empire. It was built off of an insanely massive military complex. For decades, it seemed like the ever-expanding military was unsuccessful, until of course from outside their galaxy, an unknown force attacked. When the Vong appeared first, people were afraid, but a vast and unstoppable Imperial military stood its ground. In 100 ABY, it had an extra 100 years to add to its massive size. They were crushing defeats for the Vong in the unknown regions, and as they adapted, so did an empire under 2 now older but cunning warriors. Skywalker and Solo joined their Imperial military on the front lines and concocted winning strategies to ensure the Vong could never counter them. It won them the war in only less than a year, and after it was said and done, the Empire returned to its peace. It was a restrictive, oppressive regime, but the story of Anakin Skywalker and Ben Solo wasn't a tale of bringing balance to the Force. It wasn't the redemption of a previously evil empire. Rather, this was the revenge and triumph of 2 individuals, grandfather and grandson, who had been wronged by the same evil Sith Lord. Now, finally, after every other Force religion perished, the Sith were destroyed too. It was now only a galaxy under the command of 2 emperors and their noble and royal families. And that, my friends, is a twisted story. Finally got you guys a dark-sided story. Special thanks to all the patrons. Let's talk about this story. So this one is a really interesting concept. I know I did all the other ones, would have Ahsoka back in the day, and I think I did a couple others like Maul. This one is definitely one of the more unique ones. It was definitely more challenging. Putting Ben and Anakin together, Anakin and Mustafar would have a lot of reasons to dislike Ben Solo post Last Jedi. Pre-Force Awakens, I don't really think he cares. But post Last Jedi, he's killed his son and tried to kill his daughter. So it was really kind of challenging to kind of get there. I don't really think Anakin would really fully grasp that, especially in like the first couple hours. But I think in a scenario where the First Order doesn't exist, like this scenario has, it works. If Kylo Ren brings Anakin back to the First Order, I think there's a problem. I think Anakin would simply just be pulled to the light because he would realize that the only reason his son and daughter are dead is because he created a legacy for Ben to follow, and either he would try and save Ben or just kill him. But in this scenario, they've got nothing. There's no going back. There's nothing except for one common enemy. And that's the importance of Palpatine in this story. Palpatine needs to be there to be their common enemy. It was kind of cool kind of setting up a scenario where it's like the sequel timeline, but the Empire is still in command. And that was really the fun of the story for me. Aside from obviously the dynamic between Anakin and Ben, was this future empire that's got 30 plus years of just constant building. I think Palpatine would still build Starkiller, but I also think that the empire would just be so magnificently large that it just wouldn't stop growing. And that would probably be the same case. I feel like it'd be an empire that's just literally built off a military-industrial complex, and that would just be their economy. Their economy would just be funneling people into it and out of it. And I think that's what would benefit not just the Empire, but Anakin and Ben whenever the Vong did return. And that's why I wanted to have them show up as like a final little counter in the end. But it's kind of like a dark side ending, but it's kind of neutral too, because all the Force religions are extinguished, and there's kind of a chance for a new one to be born. I don't think Ben and Anakin would be as harsh on the Force as, say, Palpatine. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. Love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.